Welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Lewin. As Texas moves further into an era of rapidly rising load growth and a need to have more clean, reliable, and affordable demand and supply side resources, there's one resource in Texas that hasn't, yet, received nearly enough attention: geothermal energy, specifically enhanced geothermal systems. Enhanced geothermal, or EGS, differs from conventional geothermal, which requires specific geographic conditions, like those in Kenya, Iceland, or in the western United States, where heat, liquid, and permeability naturally coexist. EGS, by contrast, creates permeability and a reservoir deep within the earth using advanced drilling and fracturing techniques. It requires heat and lots of advanced drilling technology, both of which Texas has. My guest today is Cindy Taff, the CEO of Sage Geosystems, an enhanced geothermal energy and storage company based in Houston. Sage is leveraging innovative technology and expertise from the oil and gas industry to tap into the heat beneath our feet. I was particularly excited to speak with Cindy for two reasons. First, Sage's geothermal energy storage systems represent a groundbreaking approach to long-duration energy storage. Second, Cindy's extensive background in the oil and gas industry, coupled with her current leadership in geothermal, highlights the significant potential of geothermal energy in Texas. Our workforce is already skilled in the necessary processes for developing and managing enhanced geothermal systems, and it leverages the expertise of one of Texas's largest industries, the oil and gas industry. In our conversation, Cindy breaks down the different types of geothermal technologies, explains how Sage's enhanced geothermal power and storage systems operate, and identifies regions in Texas with the greatest EGS potential. We also explore how the oil and gas industry's knowledge and investment can support enhanced geothermal systems, the economic benefits of geothermal, the steps needed for geothermal to become cost competitive at a commercial scale, and much more. As always, please give us a 5-star review wherever you listen. It really does help. Seriously, take a minute and please do it. And subscribe to the Texas Energy and Power newsletter and the Energy Capital podcast. Find both of those at douglewin.com. Thank you so much for listening. Cindy Taff, thanks for being with us and welcome to the Energy Capital podcast.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate you having me.
So excited to talk about geothermal. This is a topic I love talking about, very bullish on the sort of suite of technologies and particularly excited about Sage Geosystems and keep seeing lots of good news coming out about your company. So excited to dive in. But why don't we just start there actually a little bit? Tell us a little bit about Sage Geosystems. And if you would, Cindy, just kind of explain for the audience. I want to kind of start at a high level about what exactly is enhanced geothermal, as it's often called. There's different names for it, but enhanced geothermal systems versus sort of traditional geothermal. And there's even like geothermal heating and cooling. Could you just kind of unpack a little bit the different flavors of geothermal and then explain to us kind of where Sage is situated within that?
Yeah, no, great, Doug. I appreciate that opportunity. So Sage, let me start with Sage. Sage is a startup company. We're doing energy storage and geothermal deep in the earth. But to your point, if you look at geothermal generation around the world, which is about 16 gigawatts, it is all from traditional, what they call hydrothermal geothermal. So think Iceland, the geysers of California. So these are manifestations of heat and water and or steam very close to the surface. In fact, sometimes you'll see them at the surface without even drilling a well. But the challenge is it only represents about 2% of the energy or the geothermal energy resources around the world, because you have to be close to a volcano or close to the ring of fire. So what the industry is now going after, and you mentioned enhanced geothermal systems as a technology, is what's called hot dry rock. So it's geothermal that's deeper. It's rock that is hot, but it doesn't have that entrained water which can bring the heat to the surface. So you have the heat, but of course you need to be able to bring it to the surface. So what enhanced or engineered geothermal systems, the approach that we use is that we create an artificial reservoir in that hot rock by which then we pump water from the surface into that reservoir, harvest the heat, and then use that water to bring the heat to the surface, which then you can use for, either direct heat applications or to generate electricity. So the industry, when you hear next generation geothermal, that's what we are going after as an industry, is that hot, dry rock. And then you also mentioned what I would call a heat pump. So there's HVAC systems that use the concept that if you dig into the earth, I think I can't remember the depth, but it's like 100 feet. You hit a temperature that is always constant. And so what those systems do is to heat and cool buildings or houses, they use that constant temperature to basically reduce the energy load needed to either heat or to cool, depending on, of course, the time of the year. So we're Sage is focused on commercial, utility scale, the deep geothermal, and I will add, again, energy storage as well, deep in the earth.
Yeah, and there was, and we can put a link in the show notes. There was a little demo the other day in Austin of a company called Bedrock, and they're doing, I think it's like 600 or 800 feet, and it's sort of for commercial property. So this is great. Thanks for that overview. I think it gives the audience a good sense of there's a lot of different things that are geothermal. There's sort of this suite of technologies. It's not one thing, but perhaps, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but I'll suggest that you can correct me if it's not. Perhaps the biggest potential, certainly from the power generation side, is on this enhanced geothermal, because like you said, you're really limited with the more traditional geothermal to, we've got like 16 gigawatts. We could grow some from there, but it's pretty limited by the geology, and you have to be in kind of a special area, Western United States, Kenya, Iceland, but you have very specific geographies. This is much more widespread, although the temperature will vary. And so there are certain geographies that are better. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know you guys are doing a lot of work in Texas, and Texas seems to have a pretty good resource. And even that is not uniform, right? There's areas of the state where there's going to be better resource than others, right?
Yeah, so in general, hot dry rock technology will be targeting a formation temperature of 150 degrees C, which is about 300 degrees F. And I would say that most of the companies out there are targeting depths where existing oil and gas equipment can drill. So 150 degrees C, and most drilling rigs can go down to 21,000 feet. When you get deeper than that, you can still find the heat, but now you're limiting the number of drilling rigs that are available to drill to those depths. The other thing I would mention also, Doug, is when you think about traditional hydrothermal geothermal, you're looking for heat, you're looking for water, you're looking for permeability. And so your expiration risk is actually higher. When we're going after hot, dry rock, and it depends on the technology. There's closed loop technology, there's enhanced geothermal technologies, and we call our technology geopressure geothermal system technologies, or GGS. But you're looking for heat. Some of the geothermal technologies actually look for permeability, ours does not. And then some geothermal technologies look for natural fractures, and ours do not. So the less of the specific and unique, formation characteristics that you need, then of course the lower your expiration risk. So that's what excites me. You mentioned, you're exactly right. The being around a volcano ring of fire, again, is just a limited geothermal resource. So hot, dry rock expands that resource. But then I do also think it lowers the expiration risk, because you can pretty much predict where the heat is going to be a lot easier than predicting where the heat and the water and high permeability is going to be, and the volumes of water that you would need over 30 years.
So I'm particularly interested in what you've called earthen battery systems. So I believe you've been talking about the technology that y'all are using as sort of a form of long duration energy storage. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Because there is this big emphasis in Texas, as most or all of our listeners will know, on dispatchability, on having dispatchable resources on the system. And it sounds like what you guys are setting up is it's really fascinating because it's a renewable resource that requires a lot of oil and gas expertise that is dispatchable. So I think it's confusing to people. It makes it gives people cognitive dissonance, but this is fun. I love this. So yeah, talk a little bit about the dispatchability and the long duration energy storage aspect.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me give you a little bit of background on where we basically discovered this technology. So we went to the field very quickly because we with our oil and gas background, we knew after we got the funding we needed to go to the field and basically demonstrate our gravity fracking technology, and then we spent about 5 months trying to figure out how best to harvest the heat out of that fracture without expending a lot of energy. So that's one of the things that really challenges the two well DOE EGS system, is that you've got to push water not only down the well but through a closed fracture or a propped fracture. As you can imagine, if you're trying to suck water through a straw, if it's full of sand, it's going to be really high friction. So when we were doing this 5 months of testing again on how to get the heat out of the fracture, we started operating the fracture like a balloon. And it's very similar to something in the oil and gas industry, what your listeners would know about, called huff and puff. So we're using this fracture like a balloon. The fracture is always open. And then we cycle just a small volume of the water in that fracture, about 10%, so that the fracture is always open and it never closes and that friction pressure stays low. And it was during this testing that we recognized that not only it was a way to get the heat out of the ground more effectively without expending a lot of energy, which kills the net output, but it was also the perfect energy storage solution. So we all think about lithium ion batteries when we think about storage, but in reality, pumped storage hydropower, so when you pump a lake up a mountain and then let the water rush down when the demand is high, represents like 90% of the storage around the world. So what we're doing is pumped hydro, but it's upside down. It's that one of the reservoirs is in the earth, and then the other reservoir is on the surface. And so we went back to our well last year, about a year ago, and we did about 5 weeks of a energy storage demonstration where we did about 50 or 60 of these cycles. And what we showed is that we can do, to your point, long duration storage, so 4 hours to 24 plus hours. If the formation permeability is really low, you can actually, once we shut the well in and we left the well, I think it took about 3 months for that fracture to really completely close. So you can do weekly cycling, you can do seasonal cycling if there's a market for it. But the market that we're targeting would be longer duration, so 4 to 24 hour duration, versus we're not trying to compete with lithium ion batteries. Lithium ion batteries will be more cost effective than us for 2 to 3 hours. But for durations greater than 4 hours, then we can beat the cost of lithium ion batteries.
And are you, to create that storage resource, I'm not sure I fully understand the operating as a balloon and the huff and puff aspect. So is what you're doing, like, as I've heard it described before from some enhanced geothermal systems, you're sort of building up pressure underground with the steam and holding it and then releasing it over a longer period of time? Or no, you're actually using, like, you're moving water up and down? Or what am I missing?
Yeah, no. And we do it. We do use fracking, similar to EGS, but we don't operate our fractures like EGS. So we create a fracture in the subsurface, and believe it or not, rock has elasticity. So if you could imagine a fracture that's 3,000 feet vertical, it looks like a butterfly. It has a wingspan of 500 feet, and it's open maybe an inch. So what you're doing is you're pumping the water into that fracture, and you're moving against Mother Nature to keep that fracture open. So you build a pressure in that system, and then so what you do is you pressurize it, then you shut in the wellhead valve and you trap that pressure. And then when the energy demand increases, you open that wellhead valve. And what I like to say is we're working with Mother Nature instead of against her. It's that fracture is wanting to close naturally, and when it does, it jettisons that water to the surface under a great deal of pressure. You put it through a Pelton turbine. A Pelton turbine is very much like a kid's pinwheel. It spins the Pelton turbine, and then you generate electricity through a generator. So
Got it.
it's the elasticity of the rock that is basically jettisoning the water back to surface without having to pump the water, because Mother Nature is sending it back to you.
So you could operate it as sort of a steady eddy baseline, like here's the just sort of controlled output, and it's kind of a flat line, but you also have the ability to store that pressure and relieve it and release it rather in bursts depending on when the energy is needed, correct?
That's correct, Doug. So the phenomena, what happens is when that fracture starts to close, the pressure will decline, and then what you do is you use a choke to open the flow, because the power output is basically pressure times flow. So you offset the pressure decline with increased flow, and that's how you basically generate the electricity. But to your point, we've also tested where you can release that water all within an hour if you have an energy emergency of sorts. And so we can release that water and generate electricity for 1 or 2 hours if there's a need for that. But our target really is that longer duration of, like what you're saying, produce the energy over a 4+ hour duration.
And how big can these systems get? I know you're kind of in the maybe pilot or more accurately, I guess, demonstration phase. So they're smallish systems, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, like on the single, digit megawatts. But like how big can these go? I guess it depends what kind of a power generation unit or turbine or whatever you're putting above the ground, right?
Yeah, so for energy storage, if we're using 9 and 5/8 inch casing, which is a standard oil and gas casing size, we can get a 3 megawatt capacity per well, and then the duration is in proportion to the volume of water that you put into the fracture. But for 9 and 5/8 inch casing, again 3 megawatts. If we put in a larger casing size, say 13 and 3/4, then we can get up to 5 megawatt capacity per well.
And again, you said it could go up to about 24 hours, is sort of how you're building these.
Yeah, if there, to be honest with you, Doug, there's probably not a market right now for 24 hours, so we're
Correct. Right.
targeting the 6 to 10 hour range.
Got it. Yep.
But with wind and solar coming on so strong, I know utility companies are looking at the future of what kind of energy storage durations they're needing, and they're very interested in this 6 to 10 hour duration. And at some point, I mean, we've talked to different entities, say in Alaska, where storing energy in the summer might make sense, and then producing it in the winter when it's so cold and you need to heat buildings. So, but yeah, our focus would be the 6 to 10 hour range at this point.
And we could put a link to there's a report out of UT about geothermal in Texas, and it's got a map on there. So we could put a link so people can see the visual. But could you just talk about the areas of the state of Texas where there's particularly good resource?
So let me just start with energy storage, because I want to make sure I don't confuse anybody. So energy storage, because we're not looking for heat, we can do energy storage just about anywhere. We would want to avoid major faults. So if you look at the state of Texas, as long as we're not near a major fault, we can do energy storage, because again, we're targeting 8 to 12,000 feet. Now, as far as geothermal, now you're wanting to hit these formation temperatures of, at least for sage, 150 degrees C or greater at a depth of 21,000 feet or shallower. So then you start to limit that geographic availability of the heat. And so when I'm thinking about, let's just stick with the state of Texas. When I'm thinking about the state of Texas, there's a lot of heat along the Gulf Coast. In fact, the DOE did studies back in the 1970s that estimated about 5 gigawatts of geothermal power in the Gulf Coast states of Louisiana and Texas, and that's in the 1970s when the geothermal technology was dated. So I would suspect that that's higher. And then if you go out to West Texas, so El Paso, and of course into New Mexico, there's geothermal potential there. And it's not to say, I mean, there's some hot spots, of course, in East Texas, around Dallas. There's some other hot spots in the state. It just depends. When I'm thinking about the map at 18,000 feet, those are the areas where you can see the geothermal potential.
And you talked about not being near major fault lines. It's a question that comes up all the time, and I think it's important to ask. Seismicity, right? People worry about if there's going to be any seismic activity, earthquakes, even very low ones, but sometimes those are enough to cause problems. How much of a concern is that in this industry? And if it is a concern, how are you dealing with it?
Yeah, Doug. So, we do not expect induced seismicity or earthquakes and tremors with our technology. However, we take it very serious because, as you said, people worry about it. So we're actually working with the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology to put induced seismicity monitoring stations on all of our projects. So our well in Starr County, which is our test well, we've been measuring for earthquakes and tremors since 2021, and it's still measuring, and all of that data is available to the public online at TexNet. I think it's texnet.com. But and I'm not a geoscientist, but this is what the geoscientists have basically taught me, is that induced seismicity is caused by water and or fluid movement, whether you're pumping in or producing across a major fault, because it'll act to lubricate that fault and make that fault slip. And so the reason why we think our technology is going to be very low risk is because if we actually intersect a fracture, that fracture would naturally take water away from our system, and it would cause our efficiency to be very, very low. And so I mentioned earlier, we're looking for low permeability formations. We're actually wanting to avoid natural fractures. And then when we operate that well as a balloon, we have a set volume of water that we're putting into that fracture, and then we're cycling just 10% of that volume. So we're not, unlike, say, water disposal operations where you really need to pump water for a long time and large volumes of water. We're cycling the same volume of water in and out. So we do think that the risk for induced seismicity is low because of those two reasons. We're not intersecting faults or fractures because that would actually be detrimental to our technology. And then we're cycling a set volume of water that we only lose about 2% of that water. And so there's just not a huge volume of water to be pumped across those faults to lubricate them.
Got it. So you guys are reusing the water in the process.
Correct.
So you're not, yeah. Okay. So that's obviously another concern that gets brought up all the time is how much water are we actually using through this, but it kind of pales in comparison to what a lot of other power sources or oil and gas operations or any number of different energy activities are using, right?
Correct. And we actually have looked into using produced water from oil and gas. We've looked at using gray water from communities, and all of that is you can use seawater. We've talked to companies in the Middle East about using seawater. We can use all different types of water for our energy storage. It's just a matter of then designing your well and your surface facilities for the materials that you would need to avoid corrosion from those type of water sources.
Got it. Can you talk just a little bit about some of your initial projects? I think there might be a demonstration or two with different branches of the military. Yeah, anything you can share at this point about where you're deploying?
Yeah, absolutely. No, let me maybe share what we're focused on in this year and next year. So I'll start with energy storage. We're going to build and commission our first commercial 3 megawatt energy storage facility here in Texas. We haven't announced the exact location because we're still working with a utility on all of the agreements, and we're doing a feasibility study to interconnect to the grid. But it'll be in the San Antonio area. But again, 3 megawatt, a full commercial facility, and we'll be commissioning that in December of this year. And so one thing I do want to mention is when we commission that, because we use some of the same technologies, it'll allow us to learn about 80% of what we need for geothermal. It's just for geothermal, you're drilling the well deeper into that hot rock, and then of course instead of the Pelton turbine in the power plant, you would have a binary cycle turbine for the heat instead of the pressure. So then our geothermal projects, we're going to be doing a feasibility study for Fort Bliss, which is really a paper exercise to begin with. It may culminate into a prototype well in the after the study's done, but as a continuation of a feasibility study that we actually did for the U.S. Air Force in 2022. They're looking at having us go back to our Starr County well and doing a geothermal demonstration in that well. And so, because we're wanting to move quickly to demonstrate that we can generate electricity, we'll be renting a small, I call it a micro geothermal organic Rankine cycle system off the shelf. And so we can get that in a matter of months versus the well would produce about 3 megawatts. But if we rent these smaller systems, we can get those in a matter of months versus, 2 years to get a full scale organic Rankine cycle system. And then I would mention one other project that we're working on in Texas is we're working with the Southwest Research Institute. We've built with them, designed and built with them, a supercritical CO2 turbine. It uses some of the same technologies that they're working for the U.S. Department of Energy for concentrated solar and nuclear, but the DOE turbine is like 600 degrees C and much higher pressure. So we basically went to SWRI and said, hey, dumb that down, build us a turbine for geothermal. So the turbine is built. We actually are doing a spin test either today, most likely Monday. And then the spin test is just spinning the turbine without generating electricity. But at the end of the month, we'll be doing a load test where we'll be generating electricity. And the advantage of the supercritical CO2 turbine is not only is it smaller, so it's going to be cheaper to build, but it uses a different thermodynamic cycle than the organic Rankine cycle turbines that are used in geothermal today. So you actually get more electricity per unit heat that you put through the system. So ORC turbines are 8 to 10% efficiency of turning heat to electricity. Ours are being our turbine is being modeled to deliver 15 to 20% efficiency. So we'll be testing that at the end of the month, that efficiency.
Super exciting. And there's so much good work that goes on at Southwest Research Institute. I think it's a not nearly appreciated enough research institute within the state of Texas, in the San Antonio area. Kind of a great kept secret. People in this world know about it, but I don't think they get enough credit. A lot of good work going on down there. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about, so your career, you've spent most of your career in the oil and gas industry, correct? Can we talk a little bit about the intersection here between the oil and gas industry and geothermal? I mean, there's a huge, it's not one-to-one, obviously, but there's a huge overlap between the skill set needed for geothermal power and storage and for oil and gas, right?
Absolutely, Doug. I mean, let's start, with the subsurface characterization. Geologists, geophysicists, reservoir engineers, you need all of that for either energy storage deep in the earth or geothermal. Then you go to drilling the well. So you need the drilling engineers, the completion engineers, and then I would even argue, the power plant engineers, even though the power plants may be different for oil and gas, you still have that project management mentality. So it's the specific technical skills. The other thing that I think maybe is not talked about enough is the oil and gas industry is great at project management, driving performance by either reducing cost or increasing efficiencies. And if you just look at the unconventional revolution of driving that, unit cost MMBTU that you're getting out of the ground, the oil and gas industry are experts at that. And I would say that is what's going to make the largest impact on geothermal and energy storage is that skill set.
The skill set of really just driving down cost by doing things over and over, driving those efficiencies in the process, the project management you referenced.
Yeah, that and If you look at the way oil and gas, they do an integrated system approach for performance. So that not only do they look at the what I was taught this in at Shell in the oil and gas industry. Not only are you looking at how to drill the well, but you're looking at the power plant design, and you're looking at it in parallel. Because if you make a change in the well that negatively impacts the power plant economics, or vice versa, then you're negatively impacting the overall economics. So that's the other thing the oil and gas industry does, and that's what influenced us not to only look at the well design when we're looking at geothermal, but the power plant design, because we really need to get this hot, dry rock to move to where it's cost competitive and can compete with, the wind and solar and natural gas fuels of the world. So I think that's another strength that the oil and gas industry has. And then if you just layer on, the service companies, the equipment, the technology, the HP, the high pressure or high temperature technology, the oil and gas industry can drill geothermal wells right now with all of the technology being off the shelf. We do not need any new technology. So our view is the challenge for geothermal really is the thermodynamic and the geomechanic aspects, and then of course the efficiency of turning that heat into electricity, because it's such a small efficiency right now with organic Rankine cycle turbines. Although, to be honest with you, ORC turbines have done a great job of really squeezing out efficiencies of their systems over the last 50 years.
Can you describe the organic Rankine cycle? You've said that a few times, and I remember I looked it up once, but I don't remember. Describe what an organic Rankine cycle is.
Doug, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I'm embarrassed to say that I wouldn't be able to describe it as well as our Russian rocket scientist Levering, who's got a
Talk to me like I'm a average to smart fourth grader. Just give me the basic.
Yeah, so I mean, from what I understand, and I'll talk about maybe the difference between organic Rankine cycle and the Brayton cycle. So the organic Rankine cycle, from what I understand, uses mainly the heat of the fluid to you're going through the turbine, you're letting that heat, the heat in the fluid basically expand, which is what turns the blade or the wheel of the turbine, which then you can use to turn a generator. From what I understand, in our turbine with the CO2, we're using something called a hybrid Brayton cycle, and there's a pressure component that actually is what increases that efficiency to 15 to 20%. So organic Rankine cycle turbines again are 8 to 10% efficiency, whereas our turbine is going to be 15 to 20%.
But these are basically like combustion turbines. These are like, they're like a jet engine sort of a situation. Is that what if you're picturing, or not really?
They're like an expander that you're allowing the fluid to expand through the turbine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's come back to oil and gas. Do you expect, well, I guess, are you seeing it so far, and to what degree do you expect that we would see investment from oil and gas? I just think a critical thing as we're dealing with trying to reduce emissions to deal with climate change, trying to reduce emissions to deal with all sorts of other pollutants, sort of the energy transition. If you think about it from the grandest scale, there is a real problem of where we don't yet have the scale of investment that we need. And I think it's very hard. In fact, like a lot of oil and gas companies have sort of started and stopped with things like solar and wind. But solar and wind is just so different from what they do as companies. It seems like with this, there's just such a tighter connection. And so the hopeful part of me, and maybe this is, Pollyanna, too hopeful or naive or something, is that this is a real area where oil and gas companies could look at this and say, yeah, this is now I'm not dealing with photovoltaics. I'm dealing with drilling and fracking and the heat of the earth and geology. Like, this is all stuff I know, and I have a workforce that can deal with it. So I guess the question is, should we expect that oil companies, or is it realistic to hope that oil companies would put more of their balance sheets behind this kind of clean technology than they might with others?
Yeah, you know what, Doug? That was actually the exact reason I went into geothermal, is because I wanted to be in renewables and wanted to use my skill set. But to your question, what we have found is that it seems like the service companies are very interested because they see a direct application of current equipment and personnel. So Neighbors is one of our investors. Geolog, who is a subsurface characterization company out of Italy, is one of our investors. With that being said, Chesapeake just invested in Sage in December. So, a integrated oil and gas company. We have talked to the larger oil and gas companies, and I do think they have an interest, but I think they also recognize that as an industry, the next generation geothermal industry, we're still early, and which horse is going to win the race, so to speak, with which technology is still remains to be seen. And so we get the feeling that they are more watching and waiting and trying to understand not only the tech that will make sense, but what the economics will look like. And so we haven't really seen them deep dive into the investments as much as we would have expected, I guess.
Interesting. That'll definitely be something to monitor. And I think as these start to be proven more and show they can hopefully come down the cost curve, I wonder if there'll be more interest. Let's talk about cost for a minute. You did mention earlier trying to get to the point where these technologies are competitive with other generating resources. Can you talk a little bit about where on the cost curve these are? I know you can't get super specific about it, but just in generalities, how close is it, and what's sort of the range into the future where we might actually see a crossover where it really is cost competitive with other kinds of generation?
Yeah, no, actually, we do a lot of work in this area, so I can be pretty specific. So let me, if you don't mind, again, start with energy storage, and I think this is a great some modeling that we did just a couple of weeks ago for one of the companies that we're working for in the Middle East. Is they wanted to understand what is the blended levelized cost of energy for solar combined with your energy storage. And so if you think about it, produce solar 8 hours a day, use our energy storage to make up the other 16 hours a day so you can have 24/7 electricity. So assuming a cost of 2 cents per kilowatt hour for solar, which is about average, and at 100 megawatt scale, and then using our energy storage, the blended levelized cost of energy is about 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is very exciting because that can be competitive in Texas where wholesale prices are 5.5 cents. We can definitely be competitive in places like Germany and California where the electricity costs are very, very high, but we want to be also cost competitive in Texas. So that's energy storage. Geothermal pre-scale, you're looking at about 9 cents a kilowatt hour, and then so $9 million per megawatt capital. And then as we scale, using multi-well pad drilling like the unconventionals and oil and gas, using that supply chain, leveraging supply chain where you can, obviously order a lot of equipment up front, we can drive that down to about 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. We do see being able to drive that down further, but right now with inflation, it would just be tough to do. So, but again, you need scale. So again, pre-scale 9 cents a kilowatt hour. At scale 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. So the 9 cents a kilowatt hour will not be cost competitive in Texas, but it would be cost competitive in California.
Yeah, and with the amount that power prices are going up for a variety of reasons, but including the way that the market in ERCOT is being operated with these conservative operations and all these ancillary services and all these kinds of things, yeah, 5 6 cents is probably not out of the ordinary, and not out of where somebody, particularly if you're looking to build a resource that is going to be around, as I assume these projects would be. Tell me if they wouldn't, but for 20 to 30 years, that's probably a damn good price. And nine isn't, it's a little high, but yeah, not crazy high given some of the stuff we're seeing going on in the market at this point.
Oh, that's right. And you're right. 30-year life is what we're looking at. So, and we expect the same thing as you are. When these, data centers come online, I mean, they're 200 megawatts per data center. And then when you talk to these big tech companies, if they have AI capabilities, it's 5 times that. So it's just, I was told the other day the NVIDIA chip that just came out uses the same electricity as a typical U.S. household. That's just incredible. One chip uses that much energy. So, yeah, as you said, people talk about energy transition. Somebody introduced me to the concept of energy expansion, and
Our
that's
friends
just
at
really
Texas 2036, Jeremy Mazer, we're giving you a shout out right now. Yeah, I think it's a great way to think of it because it is expanding. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. The grid is going to need to expand. The varieties of things we're going to need electricity for is growing at an astounding rate. And yeah, AI is a big one, but it's certainly not the only one. Right? You look at all
no,
the chips, right? The semiconductors that are coming here to the Silicon Hills, we're calling Central Texas, I think. So they've got to have power, at least some amount of it. I think there will be some flexible demand in that, but like with semiconductors, there's not, right? I mean, that's just, it has to
right.
be a 24/7, and so a lot of them are looking at nuclear, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be looking at enhanced geothermal and various geosystems that are storage paired with solar. That's the 5 cents for the solar paired with how are you referring to the storage, geo storage, or what are you calling that?
Yeah, our trade name is Earth Store.
Earth store. So those two things together at 5 cents, because again, it's not, you can't look at that price of power in a vacuum. That's a steady supply of power. That's very valuable. Interesting. Anything else you want to say on cost or price? I was going to ask another question, but definitely don't want to cut that short. Anything else you wanted to say on that
No,
topic?
no, I think I do think that covers it. One thing we haven't talked about, Doug, is footprint. So when I think about Earth Store with solar, our footprint for our solar, I'm sorry, for our storage is pretty small. You're looking at, say, for a 50 megawatt storage facility, about 15 acres. That includes footprint for the wells, the pump, the Pelton turbines, but you also need a water storage facility, and that would be about 10 of those 15 acres. And then geothermal, because you don't need the surface water storage facility, you're looking at about 5 acres. So we do have a relatively small surface footprint as well, which, with the ranchers that we're working with, they really like that because they can still run cattle and have, a source of income from either storage or geothermal.
And that ends up being a lease payment similar to what like a wind and solar farm would have.
Correct. And then I think you know this, but the Texas legislature last year passed a bill that makes it very clear that landowners actually own the heat, and so yeah, the landowner would benefit from any kind of geothermal resource development in Texas.
Do you think that these projects would qualify, the storage projects would qualify for the Texas Energy Fund? I don't know if you've looked at that because it rules out storage, but it actually says electric storage in the bill, and you're not electric storage.
That is still being debated.
Okay.
So, the hope is that it will, but that's the exact question that everybody's trying to get answered because it isn't electric. It's not a battery, right? It is a different type of storage. So, that still remains to be seen.
Yeah, and it's long duration. It does what is the intent of that, at least as I understand it, of the Texas Energy Fund, which is to make sure that we're getting dispatchable source resources that can last for a long time, that have the ability to have an on off or up down, right? And this checks all those boxes.
Another thing, Doug, I'm not a power expert by any means, but we get taught by some of the best people that we're working with at these utility companies. The other thing is, as you start to take coal plants and I guess at some point gas, combined cycle gas plants off the grid, you're losing what's something called inertia. Inertia is what pushes the electricity, down the lines, and you need rotating equipment to create inertia. So if you think about wind, maybe a little inertia, solar, no inertia, and then of course lithium-ion batteries don't have inertia. So that's the other thing that we have to be cognizant of is replacing that inertia so that our grid stability remains high.
Got it. I want to ask you about, and I don't know whether this is a relevant question or not. Just tell me if it's not. But there's a lot of discussion in the oil and gas world these days about connecting to the grid for their operations out in the field. So this was kind of a hot topic at CERA Week, but not just at CERA Week. There was a bill passed during the legislature that has the PUC right now, throughout the spring and the summer, producing a report about transmission needs for oil and gas. And 6 of the majors, Exxon, Chevron, Diamondback, Pioneer, Oxy, I think was in there, did a study that they hired S&P, and they said, how much power demand is going to be needed for the level of oil and gas production going on. And they've got like 4 gigawatts grid interconnected now, if I've got that right. But they think that by the end of the decade, they might want to connect somewhere around 14. So we keep hearing all this discussion again of like AI and all that, but that's just one load that's coming. Oil and gas, another one. But of course, it's difficult. You can't just say, great, now just run an extension cord and now we're connected. So most oil and gas is happening with diesel generation. I assume for what you're doing, you are drilling, you have a lot of big power needs. How are you meeting that? Are you trying to interconnect? Is interconnection a problem at all?
Yeah, so we would have definitely power needs during the construction phase, but then and then of course for energy storage we need a power generation source. I wouldn't say so. Most drilling rigs, as you know, are diesel generation. Although if you're close enough, as you say, to a electricity source, you can hook up to the grid. But to your point, not only is the oil and gas industry, I guess, has the challenges with power in remote locations. We're working with like a mining company that literally wants to start their mining operations in 2026 in Arizona, and they can't get electricity, so they're going to be using a huge amount of of diesel generation. I think they have a 26 megawatt. So
Wow.
using behind the meter, whether it's geothermal or storage combined with solar, could be a solution for that. But to your direct question, we have not, we haven't had that problem yet with powering the rigs. But once the construction phase is done, then especially for geothermal, we're pretty independent of the grid, except for wanting to sell the power. And to your point, interconnection to the utility grid takes probably 1.5 to 2 years in Texas, and I'm told Texas has one of the quickest interconnection timelines, anywhere in the country. So it's still a challenge, but I think hopefully as we get better at it, we're gonna be able to knock that timeline down.
Yep. So kind of related to that, are there other sort of what are the major policy regulatory issues y'all look at? Is that a big one? Is just speed to interconnection? Are there others that are kind of top of mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, if we focus on Texas, Texas has great permitting. Everything is now under the Texas Railroad Commission. Any state, really, including Texas, that has permitted oil and gas drilling, we find it to be advantageous because they understand, how do you drill a well? How do you make it safe? How do you protect groundwater? And all those regulations actually help us as an industry. And we want to follow the same stringent regulations that the oil and gas industry follow. I would say, maybe going back to your last point, I think the place that we need the help the most in Texas is to streamline those interconnection timelines. And I can't help but think because, Texas has ERCOT, we're kind of self-contained, that there can't be policies and or at least activities on how we can, order long lead equipment as a state and actually just figure out how to we don't want to we want to make sure that the feasibility studies are done because you want to protect the stability of the grid, and that's what these feasibility studies do. Is it looks at the technology, it makes sure that whatever is going on in the grid does not disrupt the grid. So we definitely don't want to go around that, but there's got to be ways to streamline it so that we can shorten those timelines.
There was a lot of discussion at the PUC. It was probably a year or two ago about speeding interconnection for dispatchable resources. I don't know if they ever implemented that, but I think they were working on it. I don't know if you've heard anything about that. Maybe we could follow up after.
Yeah, I haven't, but Doug, I'm part of the TexGEA, Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance, and Barry Smitherman, who is, him and Matt Welch run that. Barry used to be the commissioner, and we've talked
Yeah.
about, what are we going to tackle? I'm on the policy committee. I run the policy committee for TexGEA. What do we want to tackle in 2025? And that would be one of them. And Barry has some, because of his knowledge and his past experience on the PUC, he's got some ideas. So I'm not sure if any of those had advanced, but I'm hoping that we can do something in the legislation session next year.
Yeah, and great shout out to Texas Geothermal Association. Anybody who's with a geothermal company or even a company adjacent to geothermal, if you're not already a member, look into that. Matt and Barry both are doing great work. And yeah, as you say, so Barry Smitherman has the rare distinction of being both the chair of the PUC and the chair of the Railroad Commission in his past. I'm not sure anybody else has that. Maybe somewhere in the history books, but all right, I want to ask about the Inflation Reduction Act. Has that made a difference for y'all? Was geothermal can now get production tax credit and investment tax credit where it couldn't before? Is that correct?
That's correct. The IRA is kind of a dream bill. It's put geothermal on equal footing with wind and solar. So there's investment tax credit base of 30%. You have adders like 10% if you're in an energy community, 10% if you're in an underserved community, and then 10% if you're made in the U.S. And so, it's definitely out there. We are right now navigating the process on how do you apply for it and what are the, what's the paperwork that's needed. You have to show prevailing wage and other types of training programs, which I think are all good. But I will say, typical to a lot of government bills, it's got a lot of paperwork involved. So it's going to be a bear to get through it, but very, very good tax incentives.
So real opportunity for, I mean, any number of different companies, but I really hope if anybody is listening from the oil and gas industry, this is an opportunity to, there's always a lot of complaints. Wind and solar are so heavily subsidized. Of course, the oil and gas industry's had a lot of subsidies over the generations and even over a century in some cases. But this is a way to because if I understand the language of the IRA, it basically said if you're emission free or greenhouse gas neutral, carbon neutral, that kind of thing, then you're eligible for it. So nuclear is in there, gas with carbon capture, but geothermal would be one of those things we're using that, as we were talking about earlier, drilling experience and skill set can also access these federal tax credits, right?
Energy storage as well. So the
Energy storage
energy
as well.
storage that
Yep.
we're doing it also qualifies. So yeah, very good incentives.
This has been great. So I want to wind down by asking you two questions. One of which is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't that you want to speak to? And while you're thinking of that, the other question is I want you to kind of describe if you're looking at a newspaper in 10 years and there's a feature about geothermal and how successful it's been. What do we see in that story? How much power is coming from geothermal? How big is this industry? How many people are employed? Where do you see all this going in kind of a 10-year horizon?
Yeah, first, I would like to comment before I answer the second question
Sure.
that, Texas is a really great place to install geothermal. You've got again, the Railroad Commission that's being very proactive. We actually had what I call a permit well on paper exercise with them through TexGEA a couple of weeks ago. They're wanting to learn more about geothermal. So Texas is a great place to be. In 10 years, what do I want to see? And I always overshoot this, Doug, I guess because I'm so passionate about what we do and excited about what we do. But I would love to see, geothermal having a larger, hopefully a large piece of the pie when you look at the energy mix. Right now, when you look at the pie, you usually don't even see geothermal because it's like less than 1% of U.S. generation. So I'm hoping it's more in the 20 to 25% range, but it will be all about, again, cracking that code on driving the cost down and making it commercially viable. Once we do that, I do think it's going to definitely have a bigger piece of that energy mix pie.
It's a great vision. Let's dream big. You think, and I would imagine we could probably get to the point where, I mean, you say it barely shows up. That's like solar was 10 years ago, right? These things have a tendency to move fast when it's a great technology suited to the needs of the moment. And I think geothermal is it realistic or overly optimistic to think we might have tens of thousands of jobs in this space?
No, I think it's very realistic. And again, if you look at the oil and gas capability and the number of wells the oil and gas industry can drill in a year, so the oil and gas industry in the U.S. alone could probably drill 35 to 40,000 wells. And so if you're looking at, say 3 megawatt average net output per well, you can deliver a lot of electricity just with the oil and gas industry skills and equipment. So I think there are a lot of jobs. I think it's a nice, I guess, addition to the oil and gas jobs that are out there.
Great. Cindy, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a ton. Looking forward to learning more about this. I think this is an area we're really going to see a lot of growth in Texas. Super exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I appreciate the time and appreciate the invite.
Thank you for listening to the Energy Capital Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please like, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, have a great day.